So welcome everyone to this, the third of our four-part Science for Development webinar series. And this webinar focuses on the BT Young Scientist category for social and behavioural sciences. As always, I will be joined today for the panel discussion by students who entered noteworthy projects in this year's BT Young Scientist, and also other working scientists from our programs in Africa, today Malawi, and also working here in Ireland, today coming from Maynooth University. So Self-Help Africa and United Purpose work with rural communities to help them improve the productivity of their farms and thus their livelihoods. Our mission is to empower, in particular today, rural Africa to achieve economic independence, and Africa free of poverty. In a continent where up to 75% of people rely on small-scale agriculture for their survival, we believe that it's only by tackling the challenges faced by rural farming communities that real and sustained economic progress can be made across sub-Saharan Africa. Here in Ireland, we, along with our partners Irish Aid, present the Science for Development Award each year at the BT Young Scientist, and we're never less than blown away by the quality and depth of the research presented. More and more students are focused on environmental and social challenges faced here and globally, none more so than in the category of social and behavioural sciences. Because if we are looking for radical, systematic change, then we need radical behavioural change. I can introduce two projects that speak to this focus on behavioural change in Ireland. And we have two students from Coláiste Treasa in County Cork, Sarah and Aisling. Both have projects to share. Aisling's one is on the adaptation of anaerobic digestion on farms in her area, and Sarah exploring consumer and farmer attitudes towards the use of insect protein in animal feed. Can I ask, Aisling first, for a standout moment of your involvement in BT Young Scientist?
Learning new aspects of BT and of farming in Duhallow especially, and being able to talk to judges and get their points of view on farming and the way it's changing with regard to energy levels in Ireland.
Great, wonderful. And you, Sarah, what stands out in your mind?
I think it's just a very pleasant experience. Like, you learn a lot about the scientific method and everything, and presenting yourself to judges.
No easy thing to do, I'm sure, the presenting to the judges. So well done. So we'll come back to you shortly. We have two working scientists joining us today. We have Virginia Mzunzu in Malawi, who works for Self-Help Africa as a nutrition and gender advisor. You're very welcome, Virginia.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Malawi. Thank you.
Great to have you. From the picture, we can see some nice vegetation behind you. Can you tell us, where are you sitting and what's the day like?
Well, it's a sunny day in Malawi, and I'm sitting from Lilongwe. So Lilongwe is the capital city of Malawi. As some of you know, this is southern eastern sub-Saharan Africa. Malawi is bordered by Zambia, Mozambique, and Tanzania. It's a beautiful day here in the capital city of Malawi. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks for that. And then finally, we have Assistant Professor Eoin Flaherty joining us from Maynooth University, having also lectured in sociology in Belfast and Dublin universities. Eoin, how are you?
Good, thanks. Unfortunately, not in Malawi. I'm in Kilkenny, so greetings, Kenny. Much as I'd like to be.
Nothing wrong with Kilkenny. So just briefly, maybe, can you tell us what your research is currently in Maynooth?
We're studying climate change, as a lot of people now are. But my job in particular, I look at how emission rates have changed over time, and I like to compare countries to see why some countries' emissions went up so quickly, others didn't, and is there something we can learn by looking kind of at the past, at those key points of change that maybe tell us what we might do differently in the future as our economies develop.
very topical, in particular, as energy has never been more talked about. And we'll learn a little bit, I'm sure, from Aisling about different ways that the farmers in Ireland can move away from the energy that they're reliant on at the moment. Okay, so great. Thanks for that, Eoin. Okay, so let's go back to our student projects. So if I can go to Aisling first, and if I just tell everyone your full project description. So the title was an investigation into the potential adoption of anaerobic digestion for energy production on farms in the Duhallow region of Cork. This investigation will determine whether anaerobic digesters can reduce the environmental impact of livestock agriculture in Duhallow while ascertaining willingness of farmers for such AD plants. Can you give us a bit an overview?
So just to start off, I based my project on when I noticed the strain on electricity production and usage in Ireland and indeed the world, and especially the power cuts that may be prevalent during winter. It's a big problem really facing Ireland and the world, especially when the EU has committed to cutting greenhouse gas emissions to 20% below 1990 levels. As you said, the objective of my project was to investigate the potential of AD to reduce the environmental impact of livestock agriculture in my area, which is Duhallow, and then the feasibility of the potential adoption of AD for energy production in Duhallow. It is a cleaner source of energy, and it would cut down on the carbon dioxide being emitted into the climate. Just to explain AD briefly, it's the conversion of feedstock, so which is any organic non-woody material by microorganisms in the absence of oxygen into biogas and digestate. It's a natural process and it has been used for many years abroad, but it only has recently in the last few years come to Ireland. Just to start off on my methodology, I used a survey designed for Duhallow farmers. It is certain feasibility to sell feedstock to the AD plant, and it also quantified resources for a regional AD plant. It was designed using validated questionnaires to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. So my qualitative data was the farmers' perceptions and willingness of AD, while my quantitative was the demographical data, age, gender, amount of surplus silage and slurry that would be emitted into the digester to produce digestate. My sample, I used Tegas client database and also snowball sampling. I used mailing lists and WhatsApp groups to get further responses. And the analysis then, I used a branch of social science, which was econometrics, and I decided to use the probiotic model, which was accounted for the influence of a number of different factors which could potentially influence willingness in a silage model. The eventual survey consisted of a consent section and 41 questions, and the first part of the survey was aimed to collect demographical information, where the last part was designed to assess perception of AD and the benefits of AD, just to explain to farmers what actually happens during the process of AD and where their silage and their surplus slurry will end up eventually. The ideal sample size was 100. My survey gained 102 responses, so they were all used. They were coded and analysed using Excel then after. When the respondents were asked, would you consider adopting AD in Duhallow? 83 responded no, which is shocking, and then 19 responded yes. For ease in analysis and interpreting the results, the two groups were kind of split into non-adapters and likely adapters. And then the demographical variables such as age, gender, income sources, etc. were investigated, but to be honest, they weren't found very significant. The most significant important result was that for every 1 unit change in education level, the farmer was 9% more willing to consider this technology, which was amazing. I concluded from that, if institutions, for example, in Ireland, it would be the IFA or the Department of Agriculture, if they kind of raise more awareness about AD in Ireland and its uses and educated the farmers better, then the farmers would be more likely to adopt AD. Another variable that was also analysed was the willingness to be paid 30 to 35 euro per tonne of silage AD plant. So 46% of farmers were willing, 28 disagreed and 25 weren't sure about the amount. So that brings in the education factor again. So they need to be educated more on, let's say, for example, the return on investment, the actual transport of their produce to the AD plant and where their produce would eventually end up. Biomethane from the digested would be injected into the national gas grid, which would then be used in residential and commercial properties, which would decrease climate change emissions.
Maybe we can put up your conclusions.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
You've covered a lot there. Do you know, or did you discover through your discussions and your work, why the adaptation of this technology is so low in Ireland, and what are the challenges for farmers going forward if they were to consider this?
The main challenges are that the number of farmers in Ireland are declining. A lot of people are retiring and they aren't sure what to do with regards to surplus slurry and silage. Return on investment was a big problem that I identified in my questionnaire. They weren't sure how much they would get paid for supplying to an AD plant, and they weren't sure, to be honest, if it was worth their while supplying. Perhaps if more targeted information campaigns or research results highlighting the benefits of technology were provided by institutions such as Teagasc or the Department of Agriculture, or indeed the IFA, there would be more understanding of willingness to engage with the technology.
Yeah, so you showed that in the figures and how you explained it there, that at the moment it seems a resistance to or a perceived risk, which maybe there is in Ireland, that the supports aren't there and the financial supports, but with more awareness and education, that the willingness changes dramatically, and if it economically makes sense, that the farmers wouldn't have an issue with it. You mentioned environmental impacts. Because there are many, aren't there, with this use? Not only do you get bio gas, but there's also heat, isn't there, that can be used, and a fertilizer, isn't it? An alternative fertilizer?
Yeah, there is. So instead of using false artificial fertilizers that would be known to farmers today, the digestate could be kind of treated and then used as fertilizers, which would actually any poison or artificial fertilizer entering Ireland's rivers, which would be very good for the wildlife. Horticulture also benefited from it. So the digestate could be sold as compost, which would also then the artificial compost that could be bought in garden centres as we speak. And a new study actually found out that extraction from digestate of CO2 could be used in carbonated beverages, for example, your fizzy drinks, and would be cleaner rather than using artificial means to provide the carbon dioxide.
Wow, yeah, it seems like there's a lot of useful byproducts from this. I was looking a bit quickly, just again, because we're looking to inspire other projects. So if you go on the Science Foundation Ireland website, there are research papers there looking at different digesters and looking at the fatty acids that can be produced and isolated and can be used even in a way maybe of alternative biodegradable plastics can be generated from the fatty acids that can be pulled out of the digester. And then just to say that it's not just so waste products from the farm that can be used, is it, for this? It can be food waste from our own compost bins.
That was one of my questions in my questionnaire as well. I asked every farmer, did they own a compost bin? And if so, would they be willing to supply the AD with it? But a lot of people didn't have one. And if they did, then there wasn't too much, like it wasn't worth their while delivering it because they had too little to produce to supply to the AD plant.
Well, interesting. Yeah, farmers don't have compost bins. Okay,
yeah.
Great. So thanks for that, Aisling. Hopefully we might have time to come back to you with some further questions. Let's move on to Sarah. So Sarah, your full project description was an investigation into consumer and farmer attitudes towards the use of insect protein in animal feed. And then you described it further, saying, I'm investigating whether socio-demographic characteristics affect the willingness of farmers to feed their animals insect protein and consumers to consume animals fed with insect protein. This is a very interesting part of where our diet could be going and have huge environmental impact. Can you explain to us what socio-demographic characteristics mean?
The socio-demographic characteristics of my participants were like age, gender, education level, and whether they're a farmer or not. So I measured these against their willingness to see if they had any effect on if they were willing to consume the animal products.
Right. So tell us what you found out.
Roughly 41% of the total emissions from the livestock sector originate from feed production. So the idea of using insects as feed for animals is gaining attention as a potential solution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There is more companies producing insect protein like Hexafly in Ireland, and they are successful, but there's still a lack of scale, so therefore it is more expensive. But I wanted to investigate the barriers and drivers affecting consumers' willingness to consume the animal products fed with insect protein and farmers' willingness to feed their animals insect protein. To investigate my main research question, I formulated a questionnaire that I distributed to the general public and farmers in North Cork. So this cross-sectional study employed purposive and snowball sampling methods. I distributed a total of 578 surveys and received a total of 133 responses. This was quite low, so to make my test more reliable, I would have had to receive a few more responses. The socio-demographic characteristics were then tested using non-parametric tests to test for statistical significance. So the results of my survey show that consumers would be more likely to consume beef or dairy products fed with insect protein and less likely to consume dairy or eggs fed with insect protein. This shocked me as the legislations at the moment only allow insect protein to be fed to chicken, poultry, and porcine animals. I think that consumers chose beef products due to lack of knowledge, as they just weren't aware of the legislations that aren't authorizing insect protein to be fed to these animals at the moment. The socio-demographic characteristics were the variables that would affect what I was measuring, which was their willingness. So I found that previous knowledge was the only factor that significantly affected participants' willingness to consume animal products fed with insect protein. The main findings of my project was that more education would lead to more likeliness in them adopting insect protein to feed their animals, and they would be more likely to consume the animal products fed with insect protein if they had more education. I had a separate part for farmers, and the main concern of farmers was costs compared to like fish meal. It is like €1,000 more expensive per metric ton, but if there is more demand, it would be on a bigger scale and it would be more expensive or more cheap. Sorry. Their main concern also is hygiene issues. So there's only limited feed authorized to feed these insects because we have to control what goes in the insects so they don't cause allergic reactions in animals or humans. Chitin is something that's in insects that could potentially cause allergic reactions in humans, and that's an issue at the moment that we need to research more.
Mm-hmm.
The main findings were that to introduce insect protein in Ireland, we would need to focus on educating the public on its potential benefit, and it's natural for the animals, so it would be more safe as regards to soy or other protein that we are feeding at the moment. It would reduce climate emissions from the agricultural sector. We're just waiting for the EU legislations for cattle at the moment because there isn't enough research on that.
Very good. I'm just wondering the savings or the improvement of the environmental impact of the feed as opposed to what's used now when you replace it with insects. Is this because the insect protein can be farmed, because the insects have to be farmed themselves somewhere, and it saves a lot of energy and a lot less land is required? Is that the savings?
Yeah, most insects are actually farmed vertically, so it doesn't take up much space at all in comparison to soy, which also has to be shipped from abroad. So there'd be less emissions from shipping it in, and it's more natural for the animals, especially fish. Soy wouldn't be naturally occurring in their diet, whereas insects would be.
Uh-huh. Do you know from your reading at the moment, you know, where do these insects come from? You know, where is farming insects on like a industrial scale?
Black soldier fly is the main insect that's farmed. There's a lot in France at the moment, and Innovofeed just received an investment that shows that there is more demand at the moment for insect protein, and it is definitely growing in demand. And Ireland at the moment only has a small place, hexafly, and they breed them in the plant.
Oh, really? That's interesting. So that's two things that people could follow up.
Based in Meath.
Hexafly.
Yeah.
You did this study because you felt that this was a step along the way. Your thinking was originally from Irish consumers being willing to eat insects directly. Did you get into any conversations about that?
Yeah, I just felt that consumers would be more likely to consume the animal products fed with insect protein rather than consuming it directly. Insect protein flour is getting more popular, so people are using it for baking and stuff. But I personally think that won't be that popular for the Irish consumers, and I don't think it will be culturally accepted here.
For a while. But there's another thing to look into, insect protein flour. That's great. So, which will obviously have much more nutrient value to it than other flours. So that's brilliant. Lots to think about. Maybe people are getting hungry, maybe people are not. You might put them off their lunch, but we'll see. So thanks for that, Sarah. That was great. And now let's move swiftly on to Professor Eoin Flaherty in Maynooth. You've been doing all sorts of things, Eoin, around behavioural attitudes and way resources can be utilised.
I mean, it's really great to see your results. Well done, Sarah and Aisling. A lot of what we try and do in sociology is to look at how we build resilient systems. And what that means is a very long time ago, back in the 40s and 50s, we thought that we have to work to keep kind of ecosystems as they are. So, you know, if something kind of falls a little bit out of whack, we have to keep, you know, our farming systems as they are. And we don't really think that way anymore now. We think in terms of change and what we can do differently. Resilience basically means how do you empower people to have the capacity to make their own decisions, manage their own resources in a way that allows them to be sustainable. And really, it's great to see that coming through in your work there, because a lot of what you're getting at, as you said, is about going into the future. How do we manage our resources in a way that's sustainable for the future? And a lot of that has to do with the individual decisions that people make about how to feed their animals, how to process their waste. So it's really great to see that.
And it shows you the diverse topics and angles that this can come from. You know, change isn't one challenge or entity. It's multifaceted and coming from all angles and all sectors of community, industry and society. So Eoin, go on. I know you have a few slides to show us.
I just thought I'd talk quickly about the kinds of basic questions that we do. The worst thing about being a sociologist is, and I say this to students every year, is trying to go home and explain to your aunt or your granny what sociology actually is. It's exactly what you guys, Sarah and Aisling, are doing. We use behavioural theory and we apply econometric qualitative models to try and explain why people act the way they do. Sociology is the study of group behavior. That's how we always differentiate it from disciplines like psychology or economics. And one thing I've been really interested in for a long time is this very basic question of how people make decisions and why they make the kinds of decisions they make. And the question we all have to think about is, moving into the future, how do we limit our natural resource use in a way that ensures long-term viability? Now, the way we do it in Ireland and the way we've done it for a long time is by using rules and regulations and laws and punishments and fines and so on. And a lot of the thinking in the social sciences right now is looking at other ways to do that, saying that, well, do rules like this always work? Maybe are there conditions where it's better to allow people to make their own rules? And that sounds like a crazy proposition when you think of what we're facing in terms of climate change. But I've been very interested in the work of a really remarkable person called Elinor Ostrom for a long time. She won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2012. And in her work, what she did was she said that, well, if we look back through human history, we actually see lots of examples where people weren't subject to rules and regulations and laws, and where they actually produced and managed very sustainable ecosystems that survived in many cases for centuries. In fact, historically, some of the longest surviving ecosystems that we have, human managed ecosystems that we have in the world, are ones where communities were allowed to make essentially their own rules and police themselves. Now, it's a very difficult thing to do because a lot of the resources that we talk about when we talk about sustainability are things like fisheries, forests, pasture lands, even the air that we breathe. And these are things that don't necessarily have boundaries on them. It's really difficult to exclude people from using them and overstocking them. And there's always this question about, well, how can we possibly manage resources unless we can apply laws that keep people out, that regulate what people do within them? We see this in a big way when we look at Irish fisheries. In February just gone, we saw that there was a Dutch super trawler detected again in Irish waters. And these are massive, massive ships with dragnets that can hoover up hundreds and thousands of fish. And what happened in February was that they noticed they were overstocked. It wasn't worth hauling them back to shore, so they dumped them offshore. And there was a massive sort of like tranche of fish, basically dead fish, floating in the South Atlantic for weeks on end. This was a massive, huge, huge issue, not just from an overfishing perspective, but from an environmental impact perspective. If we think about behavioural sciences, a lot of our thinking on this comes from, not exclusively, but from this guy called Garrett Hardin in 1968. In 1968, wrote a very famous paper called The Tragedy of the Commons. And basically he said that, well, unless we have really strong laws and rules and regulations, we're kind of doomed. People are just going to keep farming and overstocking and taking as much as they can until eventually everything runs out. So we need laws, we need rules, we need big government, we need a strong hand, we need punishments, and we need sanctions. And then in the 1990s, Elinor Ostrom comes along and says, actually, that's not the case. We shouldn't really presume that politicians always have the right answers. We shouldn't assume that lawmakers have the right answers. That actually, if we look across the world, we look at how different people manage resources in different countries and different times. What we often find under the right circumstances is the opposite. These systems can survive and thrive and do really well. Some examples of these that we see across the world today are things like the Torbal grazing tracts in Switzerland, which have survived for centuries. And these are systems where the stakeholders themselves, the herders, the grazers, the people who own the animals, they set the rules in common. They decide how to maintain the irrigation systems, and they manage this in proportion to their herd size. So if someone has a large herd, they contribute more in terms of materials and labor to the irrigation tracts. They contribute more time to the management and so on. Rules and regulations are voted on by villagers. They make decisions around how many stock can graze, what the maintenance costs will be, what needs to be maintained when, and so on. And they set rules about overgrazing and overstocking. The idea here is that the people working on the ground in those resources know those resources best, and they know their limits. And for centuries, for about 8 centuries, to this very day, about 80% of the Torbal system in Switzerland remains in common holding. It's very different to what we're accustomed to in Ireland, because we're really accustomed to this idea that to achieve sustainability, we need a law. And we need a law that says, if you break this rule, we punish you, and we do that by finding you or limiting your behaviours or limiting what you can do. Where this is playing out now in Ireland is around things like turf cutting. We see that what they're trying to do at the moment is to find a way to manage out turf cutting rights. And turf cutting rights are something we see in societies across Europe and the world that are a very, very ancient tradition in many respects, where community members have rights over how much turf they can take, when they can take it, and so on. So we're seeing big disputes emerging in Ireland at the moment that are playing out around what is the best way to manage the sustainability of turf. Do we need punishments for people who break the rules? Or should we let community stakeholders, the people who work the resources, make their own decisions? Some examples in Ireland, and this might be an idea for future research for people thinking of taking on projects like this, are things like fisheries. We have had for many years examples of, in many communities, fisheries, things like crab and lobster pot setting and so on, and offshore fishing, where the fishers themselves have managed and made their own rules around sort of timing, when they can go out, what they can stock. Now, in recent years, a lot of that has been taken over by European legislation, of course. But we also have other projects like the Eco Village project in Clough Jordan, which again is managed internally by the people who live in the village. They decide on the rules and the boundaries. We have lots of common grazing systems left in Ireland as well, not quite as many as we had a couple of centuries ago, decades ago, but we do still have them. We have areas where communities decide what can be grazed, how much can be grazed, when it can be grazed, and so on. We've had a lot of very successful community water schemes that are locally managed. These are ones that aren't necessarily plugged into the national grid, but where communities manage their own water. We also have a big debate going at the moment about renewable energy production? Should we be depending on big companies to come in and set up wind farms, or should we be empowering people to develop their own solar off-grid systems and so on, pool their resources through whatever that be, battery technology, grid sharing, surplus sharing, and so on? Or do we need big energy firms and big energy companies managing it? Certainly there's a big argument emerging with the cost of living crisis that actually maybe we don't need energy companies as much as we thought. Maybe communities can do a better job of it. So these are the areas that sociologists are really interested in, this idea of, well, can communities under the right circumstances do a better job of sustainable management than we can achieve by setting rules and regulations and laws? And it's really interesting to see in your project, Sarah and Aisling, that you were looking at questions about, well, why do farmers make the decisions that they make around whether they would or wouldn't adopt an anaerobic digester, or whether they would or wouldn't adopt animal feeds? And a lot of what we do in sociology is exactly that. We measure the characteristics of those people. We look at their education. We also look at things like their attitudes. If someone has more favorable ecological attitudes, if they believe that climate change is human generated and so on, maybe they're more likely to adopt green technologies or sustainable technologies. So again, a lot of what you're doing is quite common to what we would look at in sociology. And the question that I would suggest today, maybe for future projects, is that maybe we could also look at the way that we make those decisions as well. And is it better? Do we need rules, regulations, or do we need community involvement?
Thanks very much for that. Lots to think about, that way of looking at the way things are organized or structured, and the power to make decisions, how even that can, as a point of change, can have huge implications of an empowerment, even in Ireland. I know there are lots of talk of community energy projects in villages up and around across the country. So, and like Aisling's project speaks of that farmers could generate heat and generate energy, gas, even generate electricity locally into the grid and contribute to a local energy plan. Yeah, there's loads in that. Thanks. But I'm conscious that Virginia has been waiting patiently. So hopefully you're still with us, Virginia, are you?
Hello, yes, I'm still here. Thank you.
Great. I was just checking the connection was fine. We always like to include someone working in current situations and to give us a picture of another part of the world, so Malawi, and what's really happening right now in the programs that you are involved with for Self-Help Africa. Will you tell us briefly some of the programs that you're involved in?
Currently, the main project that is running is what we call the BETTER program, the BETTER extension, training, transforming economic returns. This is an EU project. So some of the experiences and that I'll be sharing in my presentations will be from that project. I'll look at some of the developmental challenges in Malawi, and also the approaches that we are using as Self-Help Africa on the ground, and probably some of the challenges and the lessons. Some of the key issues in terms of the developmental challenges in Malawi, we are looking at where we have overproduction and consumption of staple foods. So this is where we are mainly looking at grains. So the statistics show us that 78% of the average Malawian diet is from staple foods. So mainly as what we call nsima, it's from maize meal. You can see there on the picture, that's the basic Malawian diet. So this is really a concern when he's talking about biodiversity from all the food groups, where we are looking at how do we have a sustainable production that promotes biodiversity across the food groups. And another key challenge is the triple burden malnutrition. This is where now Malawi has 3 types of malnutrition. This is where we're talking about micronutrient diversity deficiencies, but we're also looking at overnutrition and as well as undernutrition. On my right there, it's where in the new guide that has been developed on live well to eat well in Malawi. It's just showing us some of the unhealthy lifestyle that we should be worried about in Malawi. And as you can see there, it says that 98% of the population do not eat adequate amount of foods per day. Another key issue that I want to share about in my slide is on the gender inequality. inequality gaps that I'll mention later on. So just a snapshot where we are coming from. In 1992, we used to have stunting as high as 55%. But recently, in 2016, we have seen a stunting drop from 55 to 37%. And when we talk about stuntedness, this is where we are looking at that kids are too short for age, for their age. And this is normally an indicator of chronic malnutrition over time, and mostly which occurs between the 1,000 days of life. And according to the WHO for stunting severity, says that if a country is more than 20%, that means that the stunting severity is high. As I said, that we have triple burden malnutrition. So there, stunting there comes in as a form of undernutrition. But another problem is where we are seeing that Malawians are getting heavier. Overweight or obesity is a risk factor for chronic diseases. And the statistics show us that over 32% of Malawian adults have high blood pressure. A recent study in 2018 showed that it's not only the urban areas that are affected, but we also have rural Malawian population that are facing the non-communicable diseases. Another worry is on dietary diversity for the general population, but as well as for children. Exactly on this slide, you'd see that only 8% of children aged 6 to 23 months are eating the minimum acceptable diet. Only like about 25% eating food from at least 6 food groups. We're also just seeing about the hidden hunger, mainly micronutrient deficiencies. So if you see there, we have high rates of anemia, 60%, and then you have also zinc deficiency, which is an emerging concern. A study that was done in Malawi just to look at the cost of malnutrition found that if we still have the rates of malnutrition in Malawi, it would equate to 147 million kwacha loss. This is the cost of hunger study, which estimates the social and economic impacts of child malnutrition. So it provides evidence why we have to focus on promoting good nutrition practices. And this is also reflected in the stunting rates that we have, because it shows that 66% of the adult population engaged in manual activities were stunted as children. Looking at gender inequality in the country, we're saying that there's a high inequality across all the domains. Just to share there, we have total fertility rate in Malawi is around 4.1 births per woman, which means that most women do not really realize their full potential. So we have high illiteracy rates in Malawi, where we have 55% of women are literate and 70% women versus 70% men who are literate. And in terms of agriculture productivity, the World Bank showed that the total conditional gender gap in agriculture productivity is around 31%. And it just shows that if we close the gender gap in agriculture productivity in Malawi, would increase agriculture GDP of up to 6.7%. In Malawi, we have high rates of gender-based violence, whereby over 40% of married women would testify that they have experienced some form of abuse. Some of the drivers would be like patriarchal cultural factors, as well as just general knowledge around gender-based violence. In terms of approaches, what we are doing for nutrition in our projects is really to promote nutrition education. And this is where we are focusing on crop and dietary diversity around the 6 food groups. On the left there, that's the 6 food groups chart for Malawi. So where we promote staples, food from animals, legumes, vegetables, fruits, fats, and oils. So this is done in connection with the food groups calendar that you see on your right. So what we are really trying to promote is that smallholder farmers know which food groups are available in season. And so this helps in terms of meal planning, but as well as food budgeting at household level. And in terms of what strategies to put in place to make sure that food is available all year round in line with the 6 food groups. The good thing is that we have the foods that we need in Malawi to have that biodiversity. So this picture is just a research that was done that shows that we have at least 600 different foods in Malawi, and I've given there just for your own reading the link. Just to share briefly on the gender comic book. So this is one of the approaches just to reduce the inequality gap that is there. So as SHA, we developed a gender comic book. So this is a pictorial vision just that shows the gender issues affecting livelihoods, and it has really been a useful tool for facilitating a dialogue and in creating awareness on existing negative household gender relations. And with our farmers, if you see there on the picture, we talk about joint visioning at household level. We talk about joint decision making. Through the use of this gender comic book, we have seen a reduction of gender-based violence, whereby we have been supporting shifts in attitudes, especially attitudes among men, where initially they would not consult their wives when they are going to sell their agriculture products, but now they would consult the wife, and then after they have sold their produce, they would actually decide as a family together how they would use the money from their sales. And some of the challenges and lessons learned, there's really need to improve nutrition data and gender data for decision making, so that we ensure that we are having interventions that are responsive and tailored to the Malawian context. So I've talked about the double burden malnutrition, and currently the focus is still on undernutrition. So we need research that looks at how we can now do double duty actions to look at both undernutrition and overnutrition, and how these can be integrated into existing interventions or new interventions altogether, but also just formative research to inform interventions on how to stimulate demand for indigenous local Malawian foods. As I've said, that we have 600 Malawian foods that are available, but really around promoting, say, like so many insects that we have in Malawi. Have now, because of westernization, people would tend to move away from local foods, but they would want to eat like westernized foods. So we need to see how best we can stimulate demand, and also just more research on male engagement and male champions, because I think the focus has been on women, but really how do we get the men to talk about gender issues so that we promote gender equality. Okay, thank you. So that's it quickly,
Yes.
as I was running against time.
No, thank you, Virginia. That was wonderful and very, very hard-hitting reality in your figures there to think of on the levels of malnutrition, the levels of gender-based violence. So that really puts this work, the theories that we're talking about and the future imagining into reality of what is actually happening right now in Malawi and other countries, and how important work on inequalities and injustices is and needs to be focused on. So thanks for that. It's always wonderful to hear from people like you in a different country and working directly with people, and to see that example of a comic book approach to get, in particular, like you say, male leaders, male champions to talk about these issues that might be passed off as women issues. I'm aware of that something like 70% of the work done on farms in areas like in Malawi is done by women. So 70% of the work, but they don't have any of the influence or decision-making powers or access to money or the market. Just a rebalancing of that. I read in one of your reports how demotivating that is for women. Why put in all this work if I don't have any say in the decisions? Did I hear you mention, just briefly, just to bring it back to Sarah's project that when you're encouraging or researching about indigenous foodstuffs, that in Malawi insects would traditionally be part of the diet?
Yes, traditionally, I think people would consume like things like grasshoppers. But in the village, you'd find that if people maybe see their fellow neighbor maybe consuming insects, they would sort of say that, okay, maybe they are eating that out of poverty, but not knowing the nutritional benefits that derive from that. Another example is we have mice in Malawi, sort of a delicacy, but then if they are consumed, some people would say that it's out of poverty. So what we are trying to do is really to promote that, to put that across, that not only chicken, but even if you eat a grasshopper or mice, that would mean that you're still achieving your protein source in the 6 food groups.
Yeah, very, very true. Okay, so again, education, awareness, and looking at what is endemic to your region and enjoying your traditional local foods, local food sourced. I'm sure I'd be interested to find out. You mentioned 600 food products in Malawi. I wonder if anyone out there did a research of Ireland, how many food products Ireland produces or could produce. So can I say thank you to all our panelists for your input. Just for one last moment, particularly Aisling and Sarah, if you have any pearl of wisdom for any students or teachers that are about to enter the BT Young Scientist?
I suppose if you're doing a survey, to make sure that you use like validated questions and make sure like that you're not biased.
Not easily done.
And make sure to do like a literature review before you do your project, and make sure that you understand your topic fully.
And did I notice on your slides, did you have some support or help from Sligo?
Yeah, I got help from Maria Dermiki from Sligo, who's an expert in entomology, which is the study of insects. So it helps to have kind of an expert to guide you along.
That's good advice. Look for support from outside of school, other areas of expertise. Great. Aisling, do you have anything to add?
When you're researching maybe articles, I think cross-referencing is very important, just to make sure your research isn't biased and it isn't untrue. And also maybe if you want to, you can, any local like institutes, for example, I contacted IRD Duhallow for surveys and validated questionnaires that they used in their AD questionnaire and study. So I think any local institutes would be very important and helpful if you are looking for help and advice as to what to do with your project.
Brilliant. And Eoin, I know we mentioned in communications about the idea of or process of citizen science. And you had an example of something in Belfast, Queen's University?
Yeah, so there's in Belfast, a considerable proportion of the water infrastructure has lead. That's the pipes that lead from the roadside delivery to the house. What my colleague Tristan Stern did was distributed water test kits to a sample of households, got them to test the lead contamination and found that 15% were above the recommended minimum. But I would say one thing just to Aisling and Sarah as well, you both brought up something really important, and that's when you're testing different factors, which is kind of the core of what we do in sociology, is to remember that even if something's not statistically significant, that's really important too, because that rules out certain factors for us. So if you often we test things and we say that, you know, the literature tells us age should be important, education should be important. If they're not statistically significant, then that's an important finding as well, because that tells you, okay, we can rule out age and maybe it's something else. So I'd encourage others thinking of doing that. It was great that you guys did find it. It's great to remember as well that even if you don't find significant findings, then that's also really important and well worth writing up.
Great, thanks for that. I will conclude this webinar now. So one more time, thanks to everyone on the panel, and we'll close the webinar now. So I hope that was interesting for you.